Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of the Uncommon Paradigm podcast. Today I have Berit Lewis here. Berit, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you so much for having me here.
Good, it's my pleasure. So I'd just like you to introduce yourself a little bit and how you came to discover this book and write this journey.
It's a long story, but I'll try to make it a little bit short. I came to mindfulness from a background in communication originally, and then I'm Danish originally, and I lived in Denmark with two young children, and my husband, who is Welsh, was offered a job in the Netherlands, and this is 14 years ago. And I gave up my career then and followed him. And in the beginning, it was all great because I had time to myself and my children. But it didn't take long before I sort of had a little bit of a crisis, almost, you could say, because I was thinking, who am I if I'm not my job? I realized how connected I was to my job title. And then I started to study psychology. I thought, okay, so I've got this extra time for myself. I might as well go back to university. And so I went back and did a psychology degree. And on the side from that, I was also interested in yoga and mindfulness, but I didn't really know what it was. And so I thought, okay, if I really got to find out how this is, because I thought it was like this switch at the back of your head, you could just switch off and everything would just be peace and calm in there. But of course, that's not how we work as human beings. So I couldn't get it. So I went on a 5-day silent retreat. And all these things during that retreat, I realized that all these things that I had been taught from my intellect, from the psychology degree about, easy to say, you're not your thoughts. I saw it. I could feel it. I had this embodied experience of distancing myself from my thoughts and emotions, and I could observe them instead of being in them. And it helped me to get a distance from them, which meant that I could control them. Of course, I cannot control my thoughts, and I cannot control what emotions I have, but I can control how I respond to them. To see how mindfulness can help us cope with aging. During my course, during the master, most things that's written about aging is about avoiding it. It's about staying young, and we have this narrative that says that once you hit 50, it's all downhill. But in reality, that's not true. It's actually, if you ask people when they are the most happy, it's actually when they're 80. And this decline is not the only thing that's happening to us. There's some other things that we compensate with. So I wanted to change that narrative, and I thought mindfulness would be a way to cope with these challenges and not just see them as something negative you want to avoid. But because when I teach mindfulness to people who suffer from burnout or is stress, the thing I teach them is not to avoid the stress, but more to face it and accept it and then respond to it in a different way. And I thought it would be the same with aging. You could face it and accept it and meet it with compassion and this openness and willingness to adapt. And that way you would stop yourself from having this extra suffering that you put on top of it when you want to avoid things.
Yeah, and it's a great read, I must say. Just to delve back a little bit into your past, at what age did you change careers?
I was in my early mid 40s, yeah.
Oh, okay. So that's I would say relatively late for someone like myself, 26. I feel like my life is already set in stone. So what was the apart from moving, what was the ambitions for going into that? And what were some of the trials that you faced? So you said you had attached your self-worth with a label of your career, and now that was changing.
Well, I was kind of forced to, because coming from a communication background in a Danish with Danish being my main language and living here in the Netherlands, there are not many jobs in neither Danish nor English, for that matter, here. So I was forced to do it. But having said that, I have always wanted to study psychology, and I think that I guess I'm really appreciative that I got the chance to go back to university. And again, when I was 48, I'm so happy that I got this chance to continue my education, because what I'm seeing now is communication psychology and then aging. I'm using them all the time. I'm now that I can really see how they all connect together, and every day I'm using it all. So
Right. So it's a blessing in disguise, really. So if we can delve into the book then, some of the major parts of the book that I found were the embrace framework. Um, can you explain to us what the embrace framework is?
yeah, so there's really two elements to this model, and embrace starts with an E and ends with an E, and those two at the beginning and the end is what I call the mindfulness loop. The awareness and the ability to concentrate and sustain your attention, choosing where you want to focus your attention, and then sustaining it. Because for me, mindfulness, if you were to say that, if you Google it, it's got a million translations or definitions. But for me, it's awareness. And in order to gain that awareness, you have to be able to concentrate, and you have to pay attention. And we are not very good at that. Actually, at the moment, we are training ourselves to not pay attention, and we are constantly letting ourselves be disturbed by our social media and the phone and everything always. And we are telling our brain that everything is important. And that means it's not very easy for us to sit down. So when we sit down and try and meditate and just focus on our breath or our feet on the floor, whatever, our mind will constantly come up with things saying, I should go and finish that report. I should go and pick up the kids. I should so and so and so. And it's hard for us to sustain our attention, but it's a skill. So the E is really this ability to practice and become better at sustaining our attention and choosing where to focus it. And when we do that, then we also become more aware, because if there is more stillness, I often actually, I have it here, right here. I often use this one when I go teaching. So it's like, this is like what a normal brain is like. It's constantly messy in there. But if I put it down on my table for a while and just let it settle, it becomes a lot more, it goes to the bottom, the settlement, and things become a little bit clearer. And it's the same thing that happens to us when we meditate, is that if we're just allowing our brain to go back to the breath or some other physical sensation, and it goes off again and back and off again, we get better at it. We catch it quicker, and we're able to stay here for longer the more we practice. And so the E is consists of notice it, note it, and know it. And notice is to become aware where there's a thought, there's an emotion, there's a physical sensation in me. And then the noted is where I label it. So I say, there's that thought again that says I'm not good enough, for instance. Or there's that crunchiness, not very pleasant feeling in my stomach, that emotion of anxiety. That's how it feels like. So the more I do that, automatically I start to know it better. So I get to know myself better by simply paying attention. So I'm able to see these habitual patterns of thoughts, habitual patterns of behavior. So maybe some of us tend to become aggressive if something goes wrong, or we tend to blame ourselves if we make mistakes. So we start to notice and see the patterns. And once we have seen these patterns, we can step back and say, okay, what is a good way of responding to this? Can I change the way that I do things around in a way that helps me be the person I want to be and live the life I want to live? Then there comes the rest of the embracing. So the letters in between, which is the way to respond to this awareness that we have gained. And so the first one is M for mindset. And that's basically, being aware of, do I have a mindset that says everything is going to go bad, or everything is not beyond my control, or whatever it is that how I'm looking at the world, my perception of the world, and being aware that this is something that I can change too. I can see things in a different light. Then the
Right.
BR is broadening out. And that's my way of saying acceptance, because acceptance is such a difficult thing to do. It's a difficult word, and it's a difficult ability we have, because most people, when they hear the word, you just have to accept. You think that it's something that you have to like, or you have to give in or give up. But that's not what acceptance in a mindful way is. It's about broadening out. So, for instance, I often give this visual picture of, imagine you have a little tiny cup of coffee, and you drop a spoon of salt in it, and your coffee will be ruined. It will completely take over. But imagine if you have this bigger, like, let's say this big soup bowl that you have in an industrial kitchen, and you drop salt in there. So your soup will still be too salty, but you will still be able to also taste the other tastes.
Yeah. One of the most powerful things I've ever heard and have now started to see in my life is everything has seasons. Summer is followed by autumn, followed by winter. When it's dark and cold and you don't want to do anything in winter, someday it will be summer. If you're having a good day, it might be followed by a bad day. And I can kind of see that same routine happening in aging. Although, with how the media presents it, how we're being brought up, it's your youth is the best part, and aging is like a no one likes doing it really. But as you said in the start, everyone gets happier as they age.
Yeah, yeah, and I don't think it's a matter of decline. It's just a change, like anything else in life. It's a transition, and there are definitely good things. I wouldn't want to be young again, to be honest. I'm much happier at the age I am now. So, and I hear that from so many places, because people are so, yeah. I think you become a bit more aware of who you are, and you are not so, you don't so easily get caught up in the little things that doesn't really matter. Yeah. Yeah. I was just actually, I should just finish with the last two in embrace. The A, after broadening out the acceptance, is for affection. And that's the compassion bit, because we're so used to treating ourselves really badly. So if my knee is not working in my old life, before I learned about mindfulness, I would blame myself for that. And I would constantly hit myself over the head for not being able to do the things I used to be able to do. But now I can see it more compassionately and say, it's all right. It's part of life. We're all going through suffering. It's human beings. That's just the conditions of life. And then the last thing is commitment to adapt.
And with that, does that come with experience? Because I find in certain ways it could be personality. Some people might have more of this gift where they seem to differentiate between something that requires their energy now or something that they can put on the shelf for later. But I've also seen people that haven't got much life experience might not be able to do that well. So then I guess mindfulness would be a good way for them to practice that.
Yes, you can choose where you place your attention. It's that's a, once you realize that's my power. So I can so easily focus on one thing, but I can choose and say, yes, that's there. This thing that I don't really want, that makes me feel uncomfortable or even painful, but there's all the other things. And I can sort of allow it. That doesn't mean that I'm ignoring the things that are difficult, but I'm allowing it to be there as well as all the other things. And it's hard for me to explain, because that's the thing about mindfulness. You can't really grasp it with your intellect. You have to practice it, and you have to feel it. You have to see it for yourself. When I went on my first silent retreat there, before I knew anything about mindfulness, I had backache. And for 2 days, all I could think about, oh, I'm supposed to meditate, I'm supposed to concentrate on my breath, but all I could think about was my backache. And what she said to us, the teacher, which was Martine Bachelor, she said, you have two choices then. You can either change the situation to change life, or you can change the way you approach it, your mindset and how you respond to it. So I tried to change the situation. I couldn't because it was still there, but I could change the way that I approached it. So instead of just immediately saying, pain, bad, don't want, let it go, I started to go in and say, okay, so how does this pain actually feel like? Is it moving? Is it warm? Is it cold? Does it have a texture? Does it have a surface? And when I do that, I go beyond that initial label, and I can pay attention in a different way. So my attentional control has switched. Or so I could go into the pain and explore it, or I could say, okay, this right now, I cannot face it right now, but I can choose to let it be, and then also pay attention to this report I have to write, or it's my choice how I will have it.
And one of the biggest things that you should be able to practice is thinking forward. So, someone like myself who is young, and I have many other young friends, we're rarely thinking about the future. So, we're being taught through social media what it's like to be old. And we see either superstars with the silver fox hair and the lots of money, successful career. We don't ever see the everyday side of getting old, the backache, the knee ache, the slower mental capacity. But somewhere in the book, you wrote about, now I'm going to test my memory here. You wrote about as you age, different types of intelligence come into play.
Yeah, so if you have a you have to solve some kind of problem as a young person, you would tend to go in and use your cognitive abilities. So you would use uh, your imagination. If I do this, then that's what happen. If I do that, and so you would cognitively reason yourself to a solution. Whereas an older person is a little bit not as fast in getting the cognitive side of things, uh, but are able to see patterns and so can solve a problem in a different way.
If I remember from reading the book, one of the gists that I got was even they have the embrace framework. Within that, you have the micro framework of um, notice it, note it, and know it. So I'm guessing that last one, the NNK, you could use in every specific area of your life to become more mindful.
Yes, that's the whole idea. That's to constantly go through these loops in your everyday life and notice, okay, how am I responding to this? How, oh, there's that thought again. And then because you have this awareness, then you can say, right, this is my pattern. Now, how can I approach this with acceptance and compassion? And how can I adapt? Yeah.
Yeah. And what are some ways, if someone is or is going through what you went through in change of careers, and they manage to put all of their value in their specific job, do you have any sort of, maybe not tips, but any advice that someone has either lost a job or is transitioned, like an athlete now has a broken leg and can't do what they thought gave them purpose? Any sort of tips or tricks for that transition in life?
I would definitely work on because I have a mindfulness practice. But if you're new to that, um, it would give you an insight into how you personally are, what your mindset is, because most of us don't know what our mindset is. But if you go in and you start to become aware of the things you say to yourself, that kind of patterns in the mind, they are very important to know, because if you don't know how you're reacting, how can you change it? So the first step is to become aware of how you are reacting, how you are responding to this difficult situation. And then a huge doses of self-compassion, because when you're going through difficulties and when you are exploring these thought patterns that we have in our head, you really need to be able to hold them with kindness, because otherwise you're not going to be brave enough to do that, because nobody wants to face how we are not good enough. And so you have to, and again, just like attentional control, compassion is a skill. It's a it's something that we can practice and become better at. And the more we do that, the more we are able to, if we're able to see that as an opportunity for growth and saying, okay, this happened. This is life. Life is impermanent and life is not all good. Suffering is part of life. That's just what it is. And the minute you can start to see that, you can also, impermanence is actually not necessarily a bad thing. So you might lose the things you love. You might even lose the people you love. That also means that there are opportunities out there, because life is constantly changing. So you will always have new opportunities.
Apart from, we said before, there could be personality that they draw on that conclusion earlier than others. It could be through mindfulness. That's one way I've started to find it, is through mindfulness and seeing other people's lives as closely as my own, through their own subjective realities, and really imagining what I would do in that situation. So if someone is, there's a lot online at the moment with, how would you react if you were on your deathbed and you look back on your life? Would you, what sort of feelings would you get from it? Would you be, would you want to go back to the moment that you were arguing with your spouse about who done the dishes or who didn't? It wouldn't be one of the first things you think about. The other grander, more metaphysical moments would be the ones. How can someone with the personality that is not inclined to draw on these conclusions, how would they get into mindfulness if it's not from an expert like yourself?
And some people are more open than others. So you're probably asking me then, so if you're not an, if you have a very closed mind, how do you get there? And again, it's through training. It's through training. It is the first step is to realize that you can change these things. The way that we are as people and the way we're responding, we our minds, our brains are extremely plastic. We can rewire things. I used to teach teenagers, and I told them that when they're going, or actually also from the age of 11 and up all the way, well, anything they do, any thought they have, they can imagine themselves that like their brain is like this field of tall grass. And anything they do, any thought they have, the more they do the same thing, the more they think the same thing, that's shaping their brain. And so if you start from a young age to say to yourself, I'm worthless, nobody loves me, and you go down that path of grass again and again and again, that will become a highway, and you will have to live with that throughout your life
Yeah.
until the day you become aware of it. For instance, through mindfulness practice, you start to see this pattern, I'm worthless. And you say, okay, is this benefiting me to have this thought constantly in my mind? And you go, probably not. So what can I replace it with? Maybe you can replace it with a thought that's saying, I'm doing the best I can. I'm a human being. I'm okay as I am. And so we can do that. We can go in and reformat the way that our brains are wired.
Right. And everything in the book has a personal story or a personal, um, imaginative story linked to it, which, as I mentioned before to you, was incredibly impactful. So you'd lay out the point and then hit it home with a personal story that everyone can relate to. So if anyone out there is wondering anything about aging, because we're not getting taught really about how to age well, your book is 100% top of the list. Definitely need to go and read it. One last question for you then, Berit, is, it may be a cliche question, which requires one answer and it might be posted everywhere, but if you were to go back to your younger self, knowing what you know now, back to a 10, 15-year-old self, what would be one of the things that you would say to yourself? And then what would be something that you would say to a stranger who is 15 or 10?
Well, the cliche, and I think actually what I would say myself to myself would be, don't worry so much about what other people think. Uh, because that's what you're so occupied with at that age when you're trying to find your identity. So I think that would hit the most at that point in my life. But if I were to give myself a good recommendation, it would be to start practicing mindfulness from a younger age. I think if we were taught this in school, not only would we not see this huge amount of young people who is suffering depression and anxiety that we see today, but we would also see a better world.
That is very, very powerful. And from one of the takeaways I took from Mark Williams when I had him on the show was you don't need to necessarily teach the child as long as, no, sorry, that does work in a classroom based environment to teach mindfulness. He also told me that if you practice it yourself without even lecturing the child, they will pick up something and change that way as well. So unless we're ready to do the work, we can't expect anyone else to do the work.
Exactly. My family sometimes tells me when if they notice that I have a short fuse, or I get angry with them too fast or too easily, they say, I think it's time you go down and meditate, because they see the difference in me. They see how I am. If I don't keep my practice up, I'm a different person, and I get so easily short.
Yeah. And with the mindfulness part, because I've not done any drugs myself, so I'm speaking entirely from theory and other subjective people, so which is quite hard to form an opinion over. But with mindfulness, that I'm starting to get into, I don't know if it's the ants, the automatic negative thoughts that you spoke about in the book that are appearing in my mind when I'm doing these sort of things, the mindfulness practice. I feel like I'm very slow to become aware of what's bubbling deep inside. I guess it would be from the subconscious. Would that only come with experience? The more I get into this realm, I'm not even 1 year into mindfulness. Would I then become quicker at seeing the negative ants?
I think maybe you should stop striving for it. I think you should just allow it to develop as it is, because the thing is that if you are sitting down to meditate in order to start to, I want to see what's deep inside of me, I want to get to know, that has sort of the opposite. That's the paradox of mindfulness. When you have a goal, it tends to not happen so easily. But if you just allow things to develop as they are.
And I guess that would only come, you couldn't think logically about that. That would only come from experience. Well, that's a powerful way to end this. Thank you very much, Lewis. It's been a pleasure. It really has.
Pleasure is all mine. Thank you.